Hello, everyone. I am Dylan, and this event is brought to you by the Madison branch of the International Marxist Tendency. If you want to learn more about us, check us out on Marxist.com, or if you want to support us, if you have that kind of appreciation for what we're doing and our ideas, consider making a donation at our donor box at donorbox.org/IMTMadison. Um, Today, we're here to talk about why we are Marxists. Um, and if your experience out there is anything like mine, it's very clear that all of the promises, or at least very many of them, that capitalism has made to you and what you can expect out of life have turned out to be disappointments. The opportunities that your parents had just aren't there in the world for you. Um, the idea that you can get a degree and get a good job and make your way in the world all on your own power and picking yourself up by your bootstraps is just a fantasy. And now all you can really hope for is a decent means of existence. And so this is what we're here to talk about today. We at the International Marxist Tendency have decided, or have decided on a philosophy that is a revolutionary break from the capitalist philosophies of old, and we seek for a new path forward on how to run society and how to maintain the standard of living for all people. Here to talk more about this is our very own Comrade Liam.
Hi, everybody. Let's see. My name is Liam. I am a member of the International Marxist Tendency here in Madison. Thank you, Dylan, for that excellent introduction to this topic of why we are Marxists. Why Marxism? Why now in this moment of crisis, which that's actually where I want to start, is looking at the current situation today. Here we're seeing an economic crisis, a political crisis, this global pandemic of COVID-19, but this crisis really has been going on for a lot longer, going back to the revolutions all over the world in 2019, the crisis in 2008. This really has been brewing under the surface for a long time. Back in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, this writer Francis Fukuyama came out with this book called The End of History, saying that communism is dead, socialism is dead, capitalism has proven itself to be the only system that works, and basically history is over. We're just going to have liberal democracy, and things might get kind of a little bit better for some people, but ultimately things are just going to keep moving the way that they have been. And we've seen that just proven like blatantly false as the years have gone by, and we've gone deeper and deeper into this crisis, a crisis which we know as Marxists is not just a temporary crisis, it's not a cyclical thing. Capitalism has exhausted its progressive potential. It's gone to the limits of what it can do in terms of developing science and technology and the productive capacity of our society. And now it's actually become an obstacle to the growth of the productive capacity of our society. It's undermining industry, science, technology, people's lives everywhere, and even our future. When we talk about the climate crisis, when we talk about climate change, our world is in crisis, and the capitalist system is really at the root of it. Even though the world powers, the United States, Japan, China, and the European Union, the UK hasn't been doing so hot recently. Typically, used to be these thought were the economic powerhouses of the world, and they were just going to continue going on forever. And we're seeing just this entire system kind of entering this downward spiral, and this crisis that is not just going to resolve itself. It's a fundamental crisis caused by the contradictions of the economic and political and social system that our society runs off of. Now, the bourgeois, the owners, the reformists, a lot of people are looking for little tweaks that they can do, ways out. A lot of people put a lot of as the crisis has deepened, we've seen the growth of a lot of these like left-wing movements, and a lot of people, Bernie Sanders camp, trying to resolve things through the system, through the current ways that things are going, and this idea that we can remediate capitalism. We see that just ultimately does not work. We have to fundamentally change the system at its root, or else we're going up against the nature of the thing. this is a turning point in history. It's reached its historical dead end, and it's we're not fatalist. We don't say that everything is just it's going to happen this way automatically. Things are just going to turn out okay. But we as Marxists believe that there is a better way. There is all this productive capacity and all this potential that we've developed, and that we can go beyond the limits of capitalism, and that people are going to wake up to this fact. But it's not just going to happen automatically, and that's where Marxism comes in. Marxism, first and foremost, is a philosophy. It is a world outlook. It's a way of examining our surroundings, of understanding history, a method that we can apply to our experience and to our understanding of the world to come to these conclusions and to form strategies about how to move forward. In the early days of capitalism, a lot of bourgeois thinkers came up with new ideas. We had Locke and Hobbes and all of these things. But nowadays, when we think about more postmodern philosophy, they talk about we're at the end of progress, the end of ideology. There's no ideology, but really what this means is they can't see any progress past what capitalism is able to deliver. They say there's no ideology because they're not able to see outside of their own ideology, and they deny this possibility of progress. Whereas Marxists, we apply the method of dialectical materialism. Now, dialectics is a subject that could have its own lead off and much more. It's one of my favorite subjects in Marxism and just in general. And it's really at the root of it. It's a dynamic view of understanding the workings of nature. It applies to society, thought, and it does away with this mechanical thinking, this rigid, idealistic thinking that says that things are what they are. It's rigid and static and abstract and not grounded to anything. Dialectics, on the other hand, one second. Dialectics acknowledges that things are fundamentally, nature is always in a state of change. Things can transform. Things can turn into their opposite. These small, gradual, those little things that build up over time can cause a rupture that fundamentally changes the quality of what it is. Everything is interrelated, and part of these organic processes that expand beyond the limits that we're able to just understand and put into these abstract philosophies. And this idea has applicability to all kinds of different studies. We think about Copernicus and reformulating how we think of the solar system, or Darwin and the evolution of species. This is an idea that has, and a method that's been around in many different areas. We're talking about in Buddhism, in Taoism, talking about phase transitions. But what Marx and Engels do is they take dialectical thought and they put it on a materialist basis, and they show that revolutions come as a result of these slow accumulations of contradictions over a long time. And they take this method and they use it to understand history, to use it to understand economics, and use it to understand how we can intervene in these processes and transform and to transform our potential. And through this, we come to the method of historical materialism. So, we're talking about before, most social systems believe that it's the end-all, be-all, it's the only possible form of existence that it can be, that can be for humans. And as we mentioned Darwin earlier, like he did for species, Marx and Engels demonstrate that the given social system, it's not eternally fixed. We have these long periods of slow change punctuated by these explosive developments and transformations and we saw that at the end of feudalism and the beginning of capitalism and these bourgeois revolutions that they have. Marx and Engels say the root cause of revolutionary change is that part of the particular system has reached its limits. It's unable to develop its productive forces as before. And we see that this is absolutely true for capitalism. So the materialistic conception of history allows us to understand it as part of a clearly understood and interrelated process. It's not a thing unto itself. It's not these just vague abstract ideals that we're shooting for. It is a part of all of these different interrelated processes that have real material implications for all of our lives. And there's a complex dialectical relationship between all of these phenomena, which it sounds very complex and very intense, but Marxism allows us a method to actually get some understanding and learn something from history and be able to apply that to our experience. And people will say that Marxism is completely mechanical or that it only describes economics, but this as a distortion of Marxism. Maybe some people who call themselves Marxists tend to operate this way, but that's not what Marxism is. It kind of misses the point and contributes to, the whole bourgeois reformist trying to actually bury the real essence of Marxism because they're threatened by it. And we can see kind of the proof of just the value and just that power of this method from the Communist Manifesto, a book that was published in 1848, but is relevant and true today as when it was first written, and so accurately describes many of the circumstances that we come to see today that really were just in their infancy then, and we've seen such a transformation, right? The burgeoning of monopoly capitalism and these giant multinational corporations and the intensification of the concentration of capital into just a few hands, the growth of inequality. Throughout the ages, a lot of economists, reformists, they try to prove that the contradictions of capitalism are easing, that things are getting better for people, and maybe they are in certain times. In the boom times, whether we're talking about times like the post-war period or other times in history, to certain people it seems like things are getting better, and that maybe Marxism isn't so applicable. But the contradictions will always undermine it. It's a fundamentally unstable system, and as Marx and Engels. As Marx talks about in in Wage, Labor, and Capital, in the capitalist system, you have this fundamental imbalance in the relations of production and the power in society between the owning class and the working class. The owning class, who has the resources, who has control over the means of production, but must compete on the market for profit. And the working class, who has nothing of their own, they must sell their labor in order to gain enough for subsistence and reproduction and experiencing any of the leisures and solace that we can afford to kind of ameliorate some of the alienation that we feel from this condition where we're not in control of our own destiny. And it doesn't matter what measures are done, as long as this fundamental imbalance remains, it's going to eventually lead to these contradictions piling up and this situation that we see. Now we see that because of the incentives, because of the structure of capitalism, we have these growing firms, eventually merging and forming these giant monopolies and corporations that then, as Lenin predicted, the next stage is the imperialist stage of capitalist development. It's the financial capital in coordination with these giant multinational corporations expanding to markets all over the world and using force and economic power to create this kind of capitalist form of imperialism. And we see this concentration, this transformation, this shift of wealth and power into just a few hands lead to these financial crises, lead to conditions getting worse and worse for the workers. They're being paid so little that the capitalists cannot sell all of the goods that we're producing. We actually have a crisis of overproduction when people are not able to feed themselves and take care of themselves all over the world. Economic activity where fundamentally, when we're thinking about what should we be producing, what is the essence of what's going on with economic activity, we're talking about producing things that people need, but it's really shifted to these giant mergers and acquisitions, this financial activity, and these arbitrary transfers of digit that don't signify any real economic development or development of the productive forces, but are actually the opposite. It's actually a waste, and it actually, as we saw in the crisis of 2008, these can have a highly detrimental effect, not just on the arbitrary value of the economy, but the real conditions for workers. But even in these conditions, even in COVID, right, we see the profits are continuing to go up, but wages are stagnating and falling. We've seen a third growth. When this article was written, it was like a third of the growth. There's been a third growth of the total that's been produced and the productivity of laborers, but wages have stagnated and fell. as we were talking about with imperialism, this also includes this process of globalization, of opening up new markets. And this process was explained by Marx and Engels 150 years ago. When we talk about globalization in the context of Marxism, it's the tendency of capitalism to go beyond these limits of the national market and to develop and intensify what we call the international division of labor, exploiting resources all over the world. And when we talk about the opening, the development of places all over the world, it should open this massive potential, but all this potential is strangled under capitalism in pursuit of profit. And thus we see the plunder of the entire planet in the interests of the giant corporations, the ruin of the environment. And at the same time, when we have never had more productive capacity and wealth as this planet and as a society, 8 million people die of starvation every year. And, even this year, we just passed 1 million deaths for COVID. How many of those can be prevented? How many more people have died because they've lost their jobs? And not just people who have died, how many people are suffering right now? I know it's been difficult for me and a lot of the people that I know. And really, with this crisis and many others, we see states and we see corporations, we see those with power pursuing profit and trying to sustain the economy rather than taking care of workers, taking care of real people and meeting the needs, doing the things that would have stopped the spread of this disease and pandemic. But instead, they weren't willing to give up that profit. The signs were hidden or ignored, and the proper measures weren't taken. And this is just one example of just the blatant misuse and destruction of all of these resources and power that are really, our potential and are in many ways our birthright as living human beings that are part of nature. Looking at history, looking everything that's been built, it's everything that we've done. It's incredible the amount of the computers, technology, science, art, all of the things that we've been able to produce is absolutely incredible. But it also makes me so sad because we see how much that's been hampered because for every artist that feels like they're living their dream, there's so many more that have never gotten a chance because they need to have a job and to pay their rent and to do what it takes. And so many people still struggle their entire lives, and even the people who do feel like they're successful under this system, really they still are compelled to sell their labor, to sell their time, to sell their energy, not to do whatever it is they're doing, but in order to make the money that they need to live and in order to increase profits and the values of these companies that we're working for private capitalists. So where do we go from here? What do we need? We need a rational plan of production. We need to harmonize the resources of our planet through a rational, democratic plan of production, organized by the working class itself. This archaic system of capitalism is holding us back. It's destroying our potential, has potential to destroy our world, and it's enriching a few at the cost of everybody. As I've spoken about before, we're on the edge of an environmental catastrophe that if nothing is done could wipe out our species and will have irreparable, drastic consequences for the planet. And time is running out. The system is going to drive us into the ground, and that's why they talk about socialism or barbarism. Rosa Luxemburg said that. We need a radical transformation of our society, and we need to do it as quickly, as effectively as possible. But objectively speaking, we have everything that we need. We have all of the conditions to solve every single one of these problems that we face. Just in the U.S., there are more empty homes than there are homeless people. We hold all the means for eradicating poverty, disease, unemployment, hunger, homelessness, and dealing with the environmental crisis in a sensible way. And if it's not done, it's not because there's something wrong with humanity or we didn't do something correctly. It's because we've hit the limits of our current system, and we need to overthrow and transcend it, to go beyond it, to actually use a system that will provide for people's needs. Bankers and capitalists, they don't consider any of these things when they're making these decisions, and they make all of the decisions that drive what happens in the world on like a major scale. Capitalism as much as we Marxists rag on it, we acknowledge that capitalism had this very important historic purpose of sweeping away barriers to development of productive forces from feudalism and all this old stuff that has outlived its historical task and become an obstacle to human progress. And now as Marxists, as people, as part of the working class, it's our turn to do the same thing for capitalism. Now there are two main barriers to this kind of plan, this kind of production, this rational plan that we're talking about, and that is the private ownership of the means of production and the nation state. The private ownership of the means of production we talked about before with this inherent contradictions in capitalism. And because this is unstable, it can't sustain itself. It needs the state. It needs the armed bodies of men to enforce this system. And thus, whenever we consider going beyond capitalism, we have to say that we have to go beyond the nation state as it currently exists and establish workers' control of production, means to defend ourselves, not through these small cliques, but through the workers themselves actually organizing and taking control and being able to defend ourselves in communities and actually being a part and owning the work that we're doing and building things that are necessary for our development. The socialist revolution will sweep aside all of these artificial barriers, and it will free the massive capacity for human development and productive forces. We'll be able to pool our resources in a planned and harmonious manner all over the world to satisfy the needs of humanity, and create and build things beyond what we even could dream of now. So much potential will be freed up, so many obstacles will be out of the way, and so many of the things that we worry about every day will just no longer be a problem. Of course, that's not easier said than done, which leads me to my final section in this, where we talk about the class struggle. And the class struggle is very central to Marxism and historical materialism. Historical materialism says that shows us the conditions determine consciousness. A lot of people, I was guilty of this myself at some point, kind of had this idea that our consciousness, is what determines our situation and everything in the world, and we kind of have this new thought idea of like the gospel of wealth and stuff like that. But we see in reality that consciousness, in terms of like the mass consciousness, often lags behind events. People are resistant to change. People tend, if things are going pretty well, people are pretty resistant to change. But eventually everything can transform into its opposite. When these contradictions build up over long times, this transformation will happen in it will happen and it will catch up to events in an explosive manner. And this is part of what we're talking about when we're talking about a revolution. And as we've seen with events recently, this is already happening. This is already developing, not to a level that we believe that it's going to be, but it's already, just in the past few years, has already come such a long way. So we say that the key to all social development is the development of productive forces. Consciousness can, on a mass scale, cannot go beyond our material conditions. And it takes great events to expose these contradictions in the system and move the masses to overthrow the old order and have this revolution, establish a new one. This process takes a lot of time, and it's not automatic. It doesn't just happen automatically. It's people that are doing this, right? It's not. Oh, excuse me. It's not just that we're not looking at this in a very mechanical way. This is our conclusions that we're drawing based on observations and evidence that we're continuing to receive and evaluate all the time. And that's what these discussions are about. And that's why this is so exciting. As we've stated before, this transformation, this explosion in consciousness has already started. Look at just the mass swell of support for socialism that has come about in the recent years, the Bernie campaign, and this explosion in the United States in particular, with the George Floyd protests. 53% of people approved of the burning of the police station in Minneapolis. Things have really come a long way from where they were just a few years ago. But we're still in the beginning of this process, and more people are starting to question capitalism. but we still have a lot of work to do. Our forces have not built up to the level where there is that like there was in Russia, where there was this mass support for these organizations that were committed to socialist transformation. And that's what part of what we're trying to build, right? They say that the central, a lot of Trotsky said this, and this is something that we repeat a lot, is that the central crisis of history is the crisis of the leadership of the working class. We analyze a lot of revolutions, and time again, the masses, we don't say like, oh, that the masses weren't able to do it, so they did something wrong. Fundamentally, it comes down to who is the leadership, who's organizing this, who is driving the tactics and strategy. Because, like we said, this doesn't happen automatically. In these revolutionary situations, there needs to be decisive action that's based on a clear understanding of the material factors, and the masses need to be coordinated and move in this decisive way. So whoever has that influence, whoever becomes this reference point, is able to really, there's the situation can really be changed based on what kind of understanding that we have, which is why we are so committed to theory. We're so committed to building our organization, to building the Marxist movement, to building the socialist movement in the United States, but also everywhere in the world, so that we can develop our own knowledge, build our own forces, increasing our organizational capacity, increasing our political level, increasing our size, and increasing our influence among the working class. We don't consider ourselves separate from the working class. We are a part of it, and we are all in this together. We have the tools, all of us together, to do this. It's not going to happen today, probably. It's probably not going to happen tomorrow. This is a long process that requires a lot of requires a lot of continuous development. And this is something that Marxists have been doing for a long time, and it's really exciting and really powerful to be a part of a living tradition that allows us to look at things, but also take this decisive action towards this ultimate goal of freeing production, science, technology from the shackles of private property, the nation state, everything that's holding us back, and taking all of the resources in the world, polluting our planet for the sake of a few private profits. As we see, like, Jeff Bezos is on the route to be the first trillionaire, but over 1 billion people don't have consistent access to food and water, and that's what we're fighting to transform. And there's a lot of people who are on the left who are opposed to capitalism. But why I'm a Marxist in particular is because it articulates a clear understanding, a method that we can use and apply, but isn't bound to these rigid logical ideals. It believes in the power of the working class, because in our analysis of the working class, going back to the beginning, when we say that the workers do the work and actually create the goods, the products, and produce everything that we use, but then the value, the means of production are actually owned by the owning class. The workers actually put in all the work that make those things in the first place. We built those computers, we built the bridges, everything, and the economy, the world cannot function without us, and that is our greatest power. We already turn the wheels that make society run. Now is the time to coordinate and actually take control of those and remove these barriers and these obstacles to progress that have been imposed. And that's why this understanding of Marxism is so important, so that we're able to come to these conclusions. We're able to take decisive action every step of the way to make this happen. We're able to build organizations like the IMT that are able to play an active role in this process, not just condemning to repeat the cycle over and over and over again and victims of our circumstances, but actually, by understanding how the process of history develops on a dialectical way, being able to enter it and influence it, and really be a part of this revolution, of this socialist revolution. So I invite you to join the IMT, to join the quest for socialism in our lifetime. I believe that we can do it. And I believe that we've got a long way to go, but I am so excited by these ideas. I'm excited to continue this conversation with you. And I thank you, everybody, for tuning in. So I say solidarity, comrades. There's a lot of darkness and turmoil and chaos in the world right now, and it's by it's by this determination and this understanding and this camaraderie and being able to come together and express these ideas and make plans and take decisive action to build the forces of socialism, to build the forces of the working class. It's definitely been very, very helpful for me to find some respite from just the overwhelming grief and alienation. So I invite you to join me. Thank you again for listening. That's it from me. I've been Liam with the International Marxist Tendency. I'm going to hand it back to Dylan now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Liam. That was excellent. As always, we are the International Marxist Tendency, Madison branch. If you want to learn more about us, again, visit us at Marxist.com, or if you want to donate to our cause, you can go do so at our donor box at donorbox.org/IMTMadison. Uh, yes, please do. um, or you can also Venmo our finance officer at Ivy Geertz. Um, it should be on the screen now. Um, and this brings to an end the first portion of the event. We will be having a private discussion over Zoom, and the link to that Zoom will be posted on the Facebook page for this event. So if you liked what we talked about here and want to talk about it with us a bit more, in a bit more personal way, feel free to join that Zoom and connect with us. Um, all that being said, thank you all for tuning in tonight. Above all else, think about these ideas, connect with your fellow workers. If you believe in the radical change of society, reach out to the IMT, become a comrade, push for the radical change of society, and make sure that you don't fall into the trap of thinking that things cannot get better. Together, we really can build a better society. We can fight the status quo and make a more equitable world. Thank you all.